Chief Commissioner, I can only call you that for a little while longer and then it's all going to fade away. How's that feel?
Well, it's been an incredible year for everyone around the world, and certainly here in Victoria. For Victoria Police, we've had a very busy year in responding to emergencies, with the bushfire and COVID. Then we had the tragic loss of our 4 officers on the freeway, and events are just frequent and constant. So you just tend to go from one issue to the next these days.
It's been an incredibly sad year, hasn't it? Must have been very tough on you, but also the people that are around you and the people that you see every day and the people that you're leading. It must have been incredibly tough.
Well, at the start of the year when we were responding to the bushfire, our members had a very difficult job to do in terms of evacuating people from burning homes, saving people's lives, putting themselves at often a considerable risk in small communities. It was incredible to see, and then our members obviously having to gear up with masks and everything to deal with the bushfire smoke and all that sort of stuff at the start of the year, and then suddenly to go straight into the COVID environment where suddenly they had to embrace a whole new way of policing in terms of enforcing these fines. Normally you want people to go out, you want people to be on the beach or in the park and go fishing and sort of things you normally embrace community to do.
Yes.
You're suddenly saying, no, go home or you'll be fined. It completely changes the nature of that relationship, and the members had to adapt to that overnight. We didn't have the usual 6 months of legislation change where we can put training programs in place and put policy in place. It just happened like that overnight. So a big adjustment for our members after even what was even a tough start to the year.
You've been pretty good at change though, haven't you, over the last 5 years or so? I mean, it's something that you seem to strive for. You see something that you don't like. Maybe these aren't your words in the way that you'd think about it, but things that you don't like that you want to change. One of them for me is mental health. You didn't like the way mental health was being viewed by the community and by Victoria Police. You wanted to be part of changing that. Yeah,
well, certainly if there's things I don't like, I do like to try and change them. That is true. I certainly have had a focus on just being like that. But certainly in mental health, we haven't, police forces all over, not only Victoria Police, haven't done that well for decades. And when harm would occur, self-harm would occur in the workplace, particularly like with suicides in the workplace. Suicides of officers often would be sort of thing that's not talked about, swept under the carpet, and that just was never going to be a good way to go into the future. We had to make sure we stopped the harm occurring, not sweep it under the carpet after it did. And so the investment that we've made in mental health reform has just been critical in doing that, and trying to make sure we've got a long way to go, but just to make sure we're as good as we can be.
Yeah, well, we changed our language too, didn't we? I mean, the whole community needed to change their language and stop saying things like, oh, there are no suspicious circumstances and police are not investigating, as code for things like suicide. But we've changed that discussion, haven't we?
We have,
Thank goodness.
We have, and I think in its way that's helped to reduce stigma, because we start to understand it as a serious phenomenon in the community, and it certainly is a serious issue in policing. And by talking about it, you bring it from outside in terms of that conversation. It becomes an inclusive conversation, and one in which people become more literate, and that breaks down stigma. And at the end of the day, breaking down stigma is that big step towards improving the situation.
Well, some stigma was broken down when you took some time off yourself to have a mental health break, for want of a better term. But, when you look back at that time, did you still feel you did the right thing?
Yeah, certainly, Justin. Yeah. In 2017, I took 6 weeks off. It was towards the end of the year, and I was really burnt out, mentally, physically, sort of exhausted. And it's a busy job, but I certainly had sort of just focused on job, and I was really, really fatigued and wanted to take some time. And I could have just taken leave and not said anything to anyone. It was around Christmas time, so I could have certainly gotten away with that, but I thought, well, no, I can't do that, because I've been going all around the force telling people to put their hand up if they're struggling, put their hand up, get support, get better, take some time, And then I felt that I had to be consistent and say, well, hang on, this is what I'm doing. And it's important to do it for all of you. And I'm really glad I did that because I still receive a lot of really good feedback on the difference that's made in a number of police members' lives.
Do you have members still saying to you, look, because you did that, I went and spoke to somebody, I reached out, I took a little bit of time?
Heard it again today, just this morning. I mean, it's a day doesn't go by or a week doesn't go by certainly when I'm not getting that sort of feedback.
Do you remember, I know it's very personal, but do you remember that moment that you thought, gee, I'm not doing well here?
There was a couple of events I was at where I had to speak at them, and I'm regularly doing that. Although in the COVID world at the moment we don't have a lot of events on, but certainly it's a big part of the job. And I was at a couple of events where I was sketchy as anything, and I thought, yes, that's not me. I'm normally so much sharper than that, and I've got a really important job here. If I'm going to make decisions and I'm not with it, that's not good for the community. It's not good for me. I need to take some time, get myself right, get some rest.
Somebody said to me years ago, they said, oh, what's Graham Ashton like? And I said, look, this doesn't sound like a compliment, but it is. He's a lousy politician. You're not very good at political speak and sort of spitting out the rhetoric. You seem to speak from the heart a lot. Would that be a pretty fair assessment of you?
Yeah, I've never really been into politics in any way. I don't. I wasn't brought up on that, and I don't engage, and I don't like engaging in it. It's never been part of my makeup.
One thing I think about is the same-sex marriage debate. You were asked a very straight question about how you felt about same-sex marriage, and I think, to paraphrase you, you said it's about time, and you were all for same-sex marriage and equality. You got a lot of flack for that, where people were saying, he shouldn't be dabbling in politics.
Well, I didn't see it as a political question.
Yeah.
Which is probably to your point. I mean, people will have an opinion that you are political in one way or another, and I get it both ways. People have accused me of all sorts of political motivations, none of which are correct. But on that issue, I feel, well, I've got employees here who I'm responsible for. One works alongside another, and yet one has different rights to the other. And to me, I saw it through that lens of this just isn't fair. It's not a fair environment for all of my employees to work in, and so I should be trying to make sure that everyone who works in Victoria Police has a fair go. And I sort of saw it through that lens, and I was asked a question and I answered it.
You don't regret that?
No, absolutely. No, I'm sure history will have me on the right side of that.
You became a copper when you were 18 years old. I don't know how different you feel from that 18-year-old kid, but has that sense of injustice been the driver through all of that?
Maybe not initially. If I'm completely honest with you, I don't think initially it was. I don't think I understood that stuff. I was probably a bit of an idiot till I was about 25, and to be honest with you, I didn't start to really grow up and see the world as it needs to be seen and mature.
What do you mean an idiot when you were 18?
As a young copper, I wanted to have fun and get out and get amongst catching crooks and having fun, and you didn't think about the bigger issues. You didn't think about the real impact on the community of crime, and you just wanted to catch the crooks. And then after a bit, you start to see, oh Jesus, the impact of this stuff's terrible on communities. You can see the harm, you can see the injustices that are going on, and then that motivates you to want to do something about it. And I think you develop that over time. Well, that's what happened to me. And certainly the further I went in my career, the more passionate I got about that issue.
Do you remember that? You said 25, but was there a particular case that kicked that in where you thought, I can actually make a difference here, for family violence and children being hurt and
Yeah, I think through some of the drug trafficking cases I worked, I saw some of that, but I specifically I worked in Indonesia for a couple of years and lived in Jakarta, but I was responsible for police investigations in the Indonesian archipelago, and we were pursuing Australian pedophiles in Lombok, which was an island just off from Bali, and moving from village to village trying to catch these guys with the Indonesian police that we knew were in and around these villages. We knew who they were, but the impact that had in these villages of accessing the children and destroying the lives of the young people in those villages, and then eventually they seemed to always be a step ahead of us. We get into this chair and get there. Things like seeing the damage that, and we ultimately caught those people, but the seeing the damage to people the real lives that are destroyed by crime, and some of that crime is pretty disgusting. That motivates you to, you know, you can see it in a very stark and real way.
So they'd sort of moved on to the next victim, and there you were cleaning up and seeing that these crushed lives.
Yeah, getting there one step behind them, and the harm had occurred to the kids in that community, and you come in with the Indonesian police and the local health authorities to try and then you're trying to find out where they've gone to and to go try and get ahead of them to get under arrest so we can get them extradited back to Australia and get them before Australian courts.
After you've seen that damage, what does it feel like to arrest somebody like that?
Well, you're satisfied that you've been able to get them, but there's always that feeling, gee, I wish I could have got them earlier. I wish I could have. If we'd done something different, would that have, that sort of what-if stuff? But certainly satisfying to catch them.
You were back in Bali in 2002 with the AFP for the Bali bombings, and that was around the identification, and that must have been a brutally tough time as well. There's a lot of heartache there.
That was a horrendous terrorism act. We had hundreds of families affected through the loss of their loved ones, and the families turned up en masse in Bali, and so we had a big issue in relation to trying to identify their loved ones from a very large fire-affected crime scene, both fire and fragment-affected crime scene, and we had to coordinate disaster victim identification in a foreign country by bringing in the UN experts and our own medical people to do that work. Very difficult time for the families to think there was actually a process that could take weeks here, when I'm here to collect my loved one and take them home now, and the anger that comes with that and the grief is a very raw thing, and so we had to do a lot of work with families to try and assist them through that process. At the same time, we had to get on with that identification, but there was also the investigation and the gathering of the intelligence, and then trying to work out who had committed the crime, and then get about trying to catch them with the Indonesian police as to bring them before the courts over there, which we ultimately did. But there was some very hard days during that investigation.
How is it going from the AFP to a state police, the Victoria Police? And I want to ask you, as a second part to that question, do you feel more AFP or more Victoria Police?
At the moment, I feel very Victorian Police. I guess I've been for over a decade with VicPol, so I guess I do feel more VicPol at the moment. Maybe at the start that might have been different, but certainly not now. Very much feel more VicPol, I guess, because of the recency of this work. Very much so. I guess transitioning across to two very different police forces. They do very different jobs. You're much more community interfaced in VicPol. You're really with community, you're part of community, you're doing that work. There's a very quick sense of satisfaction to help people in community settings, whether it's in the city or the country, for Victoria Police work. And the Federal Police, you're a bit removed from the community in that sense. You're working on organised crime, the sort of international sort of criminal, and the impact of doing that work is significant. You can make a huge difference doing that work, but it doesn't have quite that same intimacy with the community. They're very different sorts of work in that way.
And you've liked that? You've liked that community? You like being around people? You like meeting somebody new?
I take an interest in people, their challenges and things they've got to go through, and I feel I get a sense of satisfaction if I can help people. And you can only help them if you listen and find out what their issues are. If you don't do that, you can't really help them. So I guess one goes with the other.
Well, on that, one of the big changes over the last 5 years or so has been family violence. The word we use, we don't use domestic violence anymore, we use family violence, and the attitude towards it has changed immensely. How have you seen that change unfold? If
you think back even a couple of decades ago, when for a police officer called to the family violence, it was really about, okay, let's just stop the fighting and we leave, or if we have to separate you, you head off up the road, and it's about just dealing with the actual violence at the time. we're so much better educated, our police now, about what the challenges are and how to respond. We have a whole centre for family violence learning, a whole huge building out here at the Police Academy dedicated to teaching our members about family violence. What are the causation factors? What are the issues of power imbalance that can go into causing it? How do you deal with it in sometimes in very complex settings? Where you could have multiple victims or children, adults, related and not related. And then you've got the whole cultural circumstances in some families that differ depending on the cultural background. All of that requires specialist training. We've been able to give that to our members all across Victoria Police. We've established the centres in our regional areas where we've got specialist family violence units to work specifically on the repeat offenders and support the victims that have been the subject of repeat offending as victims, to support them and deal with those recidivist offenders. They do that work, and that's right across the state now. We can see the crossover in terms of our sexual offending and criminal investigation teams and family violence as well. We've come a heck of a long way in terms of that professionalism, and that's often reflected back to me in terms of the quality of the police work when we talk to victims and the fact that they can see that the police care.
These are big things to change, aren't they? It's like turning around the Titanic a little bit too. You've got some ingrained thinking inside the community, and you've got ingrained thinking inside the Victoria Police. You've really got to try to switch that around. These are hard jobs to do.
Yeah, and that doesn't happen overnight. That's the main thing with these sorts of issues. You can't change them overnight. You've got to put a concentrated effort in for years to make those sorts of changes, and that's one of the critical elements, is to make sure that you are doing that you put in place the systems, processes, and spend the money to make sure that you can generate change that might take years, but it's going to last for years if you do that.
There's that fine line sometimes where everything's going along fine with Victoria Police, and then there will be an incident where Victoria Police have either somebody in the job has done the wrong thing, whether it's somebody high up or someone, down towards the bottom. And that respect towards police can change very quickly. And we see that playing out a lot in the United States at the moment and around the world. How do you sort of negotiate through something like that when there's been an incident?
Yeah, well, we employ a lot of people. We've got nearly 22,000 employees. So from time to time, despite everyone's best efforts, sometimes members will do the wrong thing. It's the vast majority of members do the right thing by a long way. We're only talking about a very small group, but it has a big impact when people do the wrong thing. It impacts on the community. It's a big focus for media. The community see it. So for us, it matters. Even the smallest mistakes can matter. And we've got to make sure our best chance of dealing with that is to make sure that we own it when it happens. I think one of the biggest things you can do is to sort of try and be defensive and try and not show that you actually understand the problem. You've got to show that you get it. We shouldn't have done that. That was a mistake, and this is what we're doing to try to fix it. Because I think at the end of the day, people get it. Policing's not easy. People can be under a lot of pressure when they're doing it, and sometimes they make mistakes. I think most people get that, but if you're honest about that, I think that goes a long way. I think people understand it. If you're trying to be defensive, they're going, he doesn't get it. Things aren't going to improve because the person at the top doesn't get it. And that's important that you convince the community that you do care about it, and that you will own it and that you will fix it. Because on the ground, that's what's happening. You are owning it. You are offended by what's happened as well.
Is that where that anti-politician kicks in as well? That where you stand up and you say what's happened and what you're thinking, and as you say, you own it. You don't try to.
I don't know if it's a political thing. I think it's more if anyone asks me about running organisations, it's one of the first things I say is you've got to be authentic and own your mistakes, and own the issues when they go wrong, because that's you won't improve them unless you do, and people won't have confidence in you unless you do these days. The days of putting the spin on things and trying to angle your way out and deflect or or be defensive no matter what the setting. I think those days are gone.
Was that conscious for you at the very start? Where you said, look, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be that kind of guy that does that. Or was it just always going to be that way with you?
It was a trait I noticed in Ken Lay. I think he was someone who really was keen to own the issues when they happened and say, yep, you know, this didn't work, we stuffed up here. But this is what we're doing to fix about it. We're only human too. And that certainly rubbed off on me. I thought Ken was a very authentic, genuine sort of leader. And I was keen to emulate that.
So what stands out for you over the last 5 years then?
In the positive or the negative?
Yeah, well, let's start with the negative actually. What?
You don't have to go back far to go just into April with the collision in Kew and losing our 4 members, killed in Jetty. That's probably the worst day for me in this role was that day and the days that followed. That was just the most dreadful event, and dealing with the consequences of that was challenging. But they were tough days.
The community reaction was incredible to that, though, wasn't it? If there was a positive, the way that we felt about our police.
Well, if you could take a positive from it, it was uplifting for everyone that the community came out like they did. I mean, it was incredible to see the buildings lit up in blue, the amount of messages that I know that I got, the amount of... I've made a point of corresponding back to everyone that reached out to Victoria Police from the community. And I'm still signing letters now back to people.
What do those letters say?
Hundreds and hundreds of letters and emails from, I don't know how many hundreds of them, there were thousands of them we got from community just wanting to express their condolences and say that they're thinking of us and they're thinking of the families. That's the general tone, but even from all around the world, from Europe, from the US, from the UK, letters and emails, gifts arriving for the families from police officers. We got one this week from Arizona where the police officer had made these plaques for each of the families and sent it to us in the mail. It's just been incredible.
As you know, as I said before, that's not a given. That respect for the police is not always a given. We're seeing that play out now, so that's incredible.
Yeah, it's not a given and it has to be earned, and it is fragile, and it's something that we need to make sure that, well, certainly if you're the police commissioner, it's one of your major goals is to make sure that's maintained.
What are the other things that stand out? And staying on the negative side, what are those things that? Again,
it's around that loss of life, and we've had we're talking to here today in the police chapel, and the amount of times I've been here for police funerals. I don't know, I would have lost count of the amount of funerals I've been to in here with police funerals and elsewhere around the state, and they're always really tough days for family, tough days for everyone, regardless of the circumstances. But sometimes the circumstances can be very tragic, and the families involved were often young children and are left behind, and they can be really difficult days. And I think probably on the positive side, we've been able to do a lot of modernisation in Victoria Police, and to see the benefits of that as we've rolled that out has been very satisfying, to be able to give the police mobile devices in their hands and body-worn cameras to keep them safer, and to introduce better equipment for them to wear, better cars for them to drive, better police stations for them to operate in. I've taken a great satisfaction out of being able to be a part of leading that with the team command team at Victoria Police, and that's been a real positive. And the other thing that I've tried to do, both on gender and mental health, is to lead those change. But another thing I've tried to do is to make sure that as we've modernised, we've brought our traditions with us, and that we've been able to also recognise that we're one of the oldest institutions in the state, and that service with Victoria Police should mean something, and it means something if we observe those traditions and ceremonies and celebrate when we do things well, and remember when we've done that over the years, because every major emergency that's impacted in Victoria over the years, Victoria Police has played a role in dealing with it. and helping the community, and we need to be remembering that and those opportunities, because today when our members are on the front line doing very, very difficult work, the back of their minds they need to be reassured that what they're doing matters and it means something.
It's a tough line to walk, isn't it? You're trying to modernise, but you're also trying to make sure that traditions are upheld and we're still honouring, people that, had done something, even 100 years ago.
Exactly, and we've certainly been doing that, and I think that in my mind it's not either or. You can have both. You can present a very modern, well-equipped police force that serves the community in a very modern way today, but also be an organisation that understands and respects its history and learns from its mistakes, but also celebrates when it gets things done well.
You wanted to change the language about how we refer to past members as well. We call them veterans now. That was a big part of your doing. You must be proud of that.
Well, I've been able to play a part in starting to recognise our veterans and to understand that we have a duty for them and to thank them for their service. But also for many, we still have a welfare duty because their police service has impacted on them and their welfare, and we've still got a duty to be looking after them. I've been able to play a role in getting some recognition of that, and it was Wayne Gadd at the Police Association who sort of coined that term, around the veterans, and we've been able to grab that and really make that a very live thing for our police.
So you picked up some things from Ken Lay as you walk out the door and you get some quiet moments with Shane Patton. What are you going to say to him?
Apart from be careful what you wish for, I think that there are a range of things that of advice I thought I could leave him with. So what I did was I wrote him a letter, and I've put it in an envelope. And on the last day, I'm going to give him the letter, and that'll be the quantum of my advice to him taking over the role. And
could you give us a little spoiler of?
Oh no, just. It'll be a letter for him to read, but it'll talk a bit about the responsibilities that he has and how important they are and what a privilege he has, and never to lose sight of that, and then just a few insights about some different parts of the role that I've learnt only from doing the role, and I'll just pass that on to him. And of course, the best thing I can do then is get out the way and let him get on with the job as the Commissioner of the Day, Chief Commissioner of the Day, and I'll be certainly doing that, and I'll be cheering him on from the sidelines.
You like him?
Yeah, he's a good fella. He's a really good fella, and he'll make a very good Chief Commissioner. He's got really good skills. He's a good leader. He's a good decision maker, and whilst I had a big focus on modernisation, I think he's well placed to take operational advantage of that modernisation. I think he's got the good nous and decision making ability to take advantage of the changes that we've made to make sure we're delivering a better service for the community.
So what now? What happens after you finish and you walk out?
Well, as I sit here with you today, Justin, I really don't know what is next. I'm taking my retirement, and it's not something I have. It's intentionally something I haven't thought about. I've made a decision not to be thinking too much about it, and this job is like a 5-year high wire act. You don't want to fall off the wire at the last little bit, so I've focused on making sure that I continue to focus on what I'm doing right up until that last day, and then I've decided, well, I'll leave, wake up the next morning with nothing to do, I'll be retired, and then I'll have a think about things from there.
What do you think you'd like to do? I mean, you're still a young man, and there's a lot of things that I know that you care about. Is there charity that you want to be involved in? Or do you really not want to think about it at all?
Oh, well, clearly you develop areas that you're passionate about over the years, and I'll have a think about a few of those areas, and when I get a chance, and if I can make a difference in some way, contribute in some way, that might be an opportunity down the track. But I'm really not. I really am sort of wide open in that regard at the moment.
Well, something that people may not know is that a couple of things is that one is that you're nuts for barbecuing. They may not know. I think that's been mentioned before, but they've also got a very good sense of humour that may not always come across. I guess that's all part of the job and part of the uniform, but you've got an incredibly good sense of humour. You're looking forward to laughing a bit more.
Humour's in the eye of the beholder. Some people might not agree with you, Justin, but I do have a go. I am prepared to have a crack, and I think it's in this sort of job, you deal with a lot of, you're talking about a lot of death and destruction every day. I think for police, it's not uncommon for police to have a sense of humour fairly well honed because of that, and to try and be humorous where you can. And I've certainly been like that over the years, and helps to make the esprit de corps around the office work a bit. If they don't like it, then they can hang it on me for the terrible jokes I tell.
Is there anything you want to say to the community that you've been serving for the last 5 years?
Well, if I could say anything, it would be thank you. It's been an honour to be Chief Commissioner. It's a privilege I've taken very seriously over the last 5 years, and I've sought to really try and make a difference while I've been in the role. But policing doesn't happen without the consent and the support of the community, and I want to thank the community for that consent and support over the 5 years that I've been in this role, and thank you on behalf of Victoria Police for that.
Thanks very much, Chief. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Justin.